You get a majority, that's 50% plus one, the union's in, end of story. And we've talked about this already. It's far easier for unions to obtain cards than to win elections. There's a potential for misinformation, intimidation, and coercion. I mean, who knows what the employees are being told? There are lots of stories out there of employees who, over the years, under the current law, where you still have an election, but the union still has to get 30%, where employees have said, well, they were told that that card meant they were getting health insurance. You know, the union organizer said, if you want free health insurance, sign this. Oh, sure, I'll sign that. You know, person signs right up. Meanwhile, they were signing a card that was getting them an election. Now, at least you had the election as a check against that previously. Under the new law, if it's passed, you won't have that, because once the cards are signed, that's the end of the story. So there's all kinds of dangers with this card check provision of the Employee Free Choice Act. The second aspect of the Employee Free Choice Act, which I believe is just as controversial, it hasn't gotten as much attention because I think the card check is so controversial, the media has jumped all over it. This aspect of it is a little drier than the card check part of it, so it sort of gets buried in news stories and people don't know as much about it. But under this provision, the way it works now, if a union is certified as the bargaining representative after an election, the employer is obligated to meet with the union and to bargain in good faith. And both parties have to bargain in good faith in an effort to reach an agreement. You cannot be forced, an employer cannot be forced. The obligation to bargain in good faith does not require that an employer agree to anything. As long as you're truly bargaining with an intention to reach an agreement, you can take a very firm position that this is as far as we'll go, that it'll hurt our business if we do anything else, and we're not going to give anything further than that. And that's the way it's always been. And the union, if they don't like that eventually, they can strike. That's the way it's always worked. And the employer then has the right to replace the employees and to get the work done through other means, and it's economic warfare. But that's the way it's always worked. The NLRB never required or forced an employer to agree to anything, and that's always the way it's been under the National Labor Relations Act. Well, under the Employee Free Choice Act, all that would change. They would first require the parties to commence bargaining within 10 days of the union being certified, or the union making a request, which is unbelievably fast. I mean, after a union gets certified now, you have to start bargaining. I mean, it takes a while to figure out. You have to sit down with proposals. You have to figure out what your proposals are going to be, which can take a while. Under the new statute, you would be required within 10 days of the union's request to sit down and bargain. And then, if you can't reach an agreement within 90 days, it goes to mediation. Now, mediation is a third party who comes in and tries to get you to agree. They can't force you to agree, a mediator, but they try to get the parties to agree. Okay? That happens after 90 days. After 30 days of that, if you can't agree, it goes to binding interest arbitration. And binding interest arbitration is a third party arbitrator deciding what the terms and conditions of employment are going to be. So you would have somebody who may know nothing about your industry, nothing about your business, telling you that this is what you're going to pay your employees, and this is the health insurance that you're going to give your employees, and this is the pension that you're going to give your employees, and this is everything else that you're going to give your employees. I mean, it's incredibly, incredibly draconian, the concept, and when you think about it, is incredibly draconian that you know, especially with the law that we've had for so many years in this country, which is you bargain and you know, you give and take, and you know, whoever has the leverage and the stronger position, you know, can get, you know, what they want to get. You know, this completely changes that. So as I said, I think this is just as controversial as the card check provision, but has not gotten as much attention. Now, it shifts the power in negotiations. It encourages dilatory tactics by unions because, in my experience, I've represented public sector entities as well over the years. And in the public sector, in certain public sector industries, you have interest arbitration now. And the reason for that in the public sector is many public sector unions are prohibited from striking. So in return for them not being allowed to strike, they would give an interest arbitration in its place. Because in the private sector, unions can strike to get what they want. Because you can't do that in the public sector in many industries interest arbitration replaces it, so you don't have strikes. But in the public sector, where they have interest arbitration, and I've represented employers in those industries, the unions have very little incentive to really negotiate. They sort of sit back and wait and just file for arbitration, and then they oftentimes get what they want in the interest arbitration. So from my experience, this would encourage unions in the private sector to do the same thing. They'll just sit back. If they can't get what they want, they'll just wait and then go to interest arbitration and try to get it there. And again, the other items here I talked about, it really exposes you to the whim of an arbitrator who may not know your industry or your business, which is really, really scary. Okay, the third aspect of the Employee Free Choice Act, we talked about the first two. We talked about card check, and we talked about the mandatory mediation and interest arbitration. The third aspect is the enhanced penalties and grounds for injunctions. Now, this aspect of it is getting no attention at all because the first two are so dramatic. You know, if you read anything about this statute, you read about card check mostly. Sometimes, especially more recently, people are paying more attention to the interest arbitration provisions, but you almost never hear about this, and this actually could be quite problematic for employers as well. What this would provide for is treble damages, which is 3 times damages to employees who are discriminated against, terminated by an employer during a union organizing campaign. Right now, if there is a charge of this, if an employee is terminated now, and it's found that they were terminated for union activity, then they will get back pay. So if they missed 6 months worth of work, they get 6 months of back pay plus interest, but they get what they lost. Under this new law, they would get what they lost times 3. Okay, so the potential for damages is much greater. And it also provides, on top of that, for civil penalties against the employer of $20,000 per violation for ULPs committed during the bargaining process, which again, right now you don't have that at all. So that is another thing that we would have, that we didn't have previously. Now, and it also provides for injunctions. It makes it easier for the National Labor Relations Board to get injunctions against employers during the bargaining process, forcing the employer to bargain in good faith and to engage in other activity. Now, the problems with these remedial changes, the treble damages and the injunctions, is it's really addressed to the conduct of very few employers. Unions try to tout statistics that suggest that 25% of all union organizing campaigns result in the discharge of the main union organizer. And they've pointed to this study to try to convince congressmen and congresswomen to vote for the Employee Free Choice Act. It turns out the study was done by a former union organizer, okay? And it's really not based on hard statistics. It's based on speaking to other people in unions. And once the report was broken down, it turned out that it wasn't 1/4 of all elections. It was very few elections and organizing campaigns where you had union organizers terminated. So you're really addressing, the conduct is addressed to just very few employers, not a lot of the employers. The penalties could be used as leverage by the unions. I mean, so if they're having a problem, they just have unfair labor practice charges filed. So now the employer has to defend the unfair labor practice charge and has the risk of treble damages and a $20,000 penalty. That can be pretty significant leverage on an employer, especially if it's a small employer that doesn't have a lot of money. You have the potential for overzealous enforcement by the National Labor Relations Board. A lot of the people who work for the National Labor Relations Board, especially in the regional offices, are not political appointees. They've been working for the NLRB for years, and they tend to be, in my opinion, because I work with these people all the time, they tend to be much more pro-union than they are pro-management. They belong to unions themselves. The people that work for the NLRB are unionized, believe it or not. So, you know, they're supposed to be neutral. To me, it's a joke. There's a real concern that you'd have overzealous enforcement of these penalties.